네, 안녕하십니까. 2021 제2회 코리아헤럴드 금융기자 포럼의 사회를 맡은 안영호입니다. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Anyoung from the Korea Herald. Thank you all for coming to the Korea Herald's second finance forum today.
Founded in 1953, the Korea Herald, Korea's leading English language newspaper, has prepared this year's forum under the theme of Korea's innovation in ESG to seek our way forward for Korea to become the Asian financial hub, as well as for ESG, which has become the key to future finance. This forum is broadcast live throughout the Asian region via Asia News Network. It is a great honor to have the honorable distinguished guests here today on this beautiful and clear autumn day. Today we have
the best financial leaders who play a key role in the Korean economy in this place. Please understand that we cannot introduce each and every one of you due to time constraints. Now I'd like to introduce our distinguished guests. Please welcome them with a big round of applause. Mr. Choi Jin-young, CEO of the KoreaHerald. So, Mr. Yoon Jae-ok, Chairman of the National Policy Committee of the National Assembly. Mr. Kim Yong-Jin, CEO of the National Pension Service. Mr. Jin Ok-dong, CEO of Shinhan Bank. Mr. Ho In, CEO of KB Kookmin Bank. Mr. Seo Yu-seok, CEO of Mirae Asset Global Investments. Mr. Kwon Jun-hak, CEO of Nongyuk Bank. Mr. Kwon Kwang-seok, CEO of Uri Bank. Mr. Park Song-ho, CEO of Hana Bank. So, Mr. Seo Chi-gil, Senior Executive Vice President of Industrial Bank of Korea.
We would also like to welcome our honored guests from embassies in the Republic of Korea. Simon Smith, British Ambassador to the Republic of Korea. Alfredo Carlos Bascu, Ambassador of Argentina to the Republic of Korea.
So once again, I would like to express my deep gratitude to everyone who has joined us in the early morning to make the KoreaHerald's second financial forum a more meaningful event.
We will now invite Mr. Choi Jin-young, the CEO of the Korea Herald, for his opening remarks. Please give him a big round of applause. Good morning. Nice to meet you. I am Choi Jin-young, CEO of the Korea Herald. First of all, I would like to thank all the distinguished guests, and it's an honor to be here. I would like to first thank all the distinguished guests, especially Honorable Yoon Jae-ok, Chairman of the National Policy Committee of the National Assembly, His Excellency Mr. Alfredo Carlos Bascu, His Excellency Mr. Simon Smith, and Mr. Kim Yong-Jin, CEO of the National Pension Service, and the distinguished speakers at today's forum for taking time out of their busy schedules to grace this event. And all the CEOs and executives of leading Korean banks representing the Korean financial industry, I would like to thank all of them for your time on behalf of the staff at the Korea Herald. Today's forum strictly observes the Korean government's COVID-19 preventive measures and is being held in an on and offline manner, regretfully enough. Nevertheless, I hope it will be a good opportunity to share valuable policies and insights. And the Asia News Network that Korea Herald is leading is also broadcasting this event live in the Asian region. COVID-19 pandemic brought about uncertainty that is only growing to corporate management. And sustainable management that takes into account the environment, society, and governance has become the spirit of the new era. At the core of this lies finance. Financial investment in sustainable companies has already become a major stream of global funds. Great interests around the globe is in the fourth industrial revolution and climate crisis, as well as the new trend of investment and policy making, have great impact on the Korean financial company survival and innovation strategies. In fact, it is no exaggeration to say that finance is the priming water in creating the ESG ecosystem and that the key to its success is finance. The financial industry that has joined the ESG wave is betting life or death on customer-oriented digital transformation such as AI, big data, and metaverse, thereby opening up a new era of finance. Against this backdrop, at today's forum, the KoreaHerald would like to draw a blueprint for future finance that ESG will bring about with you. I hope that today's forum, where we discuss about the innovation policy alternatives, will serve as a stepping stone for Korea to become a global financial powerhouse. Distinguished guests, the true role of finance is not simply to increase assets, but to provide opportunities by anticipating future values. In that sense, ESG is about returning to the essence of finance. The KoreaHerald will join in on that meaningful journey. Without you, the financial experts who are here today, the great fruits of today's economic development in Korea would never have been achieved. Likewise, the KoreaHerald, founded on August 15, 1953, on the ruins of war, have faithfully fulfilled our mission as a global media outlet for the past 70 years to introduce Korea to the world and help Korean companies and Hallyu culture advance and grow into the global market. We will do our best to support this and serve as a foundation for the Korean financial industry to leap forward as Asia's top-notch financial hub using ESG and digital as its two wings. Many global investors in 2022 will see ESG finance as a tipping point. Now is the time to go beyond the inflection point of the pandemic and muster our strength toward innovation. I hope that this forum will become a compass that opens the future of ESG finance, and I hope everyone who are attending this will find it fruitful. I thank all of you for your time today, and I will cherish your efforts to attend today's forum from early morning onwards amidst this grave COVID-19 situation. I would also like to thank the organizers and also the best journalists in Asia who are working at the KoreaHerald for this event. Thank you.
So thank you, Mr. Choi Jin-young. So to celebrate the second KoreaHerald Finance Forum this year, our renowned guests sent us messages of congratulations. So first, there will be a congratulatory remark from Representative Yoon Jae-ok, who took office as the chairman of the National Policy Committee of the National Assembly. So he served various positions in the National Policy Agency. He also has been elected as a lawmaker of the National Assembly 3 times. So please welcome Mr. Yoon, who will lead the national financial policies during the first half of the 21st National Assembly. So I'm Yoon Jae-ok, Chairman of the National Policy Committee of the National Assembly. So the KoreaHerald has hosted this second finance forum. I'd like to congratulate the company on hosting this event. So especially, this is related to the financial recovery after the outbreak of the pandemic, and the main theme is the ESG. So this is a very meaningful event. In April 2006, the United Nations defined new guidelines for the corporate assessment. So investors' assessment of corporations has shifted from the finance-focused factors into the ESG-related factors. So in the global, the ESG investment amount has increased 3 times over the past few years. And so in Korea as well, Kim Yong-Jin, CEO of the National Pension Service, will allocate also more than the 25% of the total assets into the ESG quality companies. It will also set up the special committee for the screening of companies. So for this issue, then it has also issued a large amount of ESG bonds. So it shows that the great commitment from the Korean governments as well as the Korean businesses. So we have already large corporations, and also all of the companies that will be listed in the Korean stock market, so will follow the guidelines regarding ESG. So even though we emphasize the ESG, so we have more than the 600 ESG information service providers. So it means that we have not had any unified guidelines for ESG. So we have had a survey conducted by the Korea Finance Association. 70% of the Korean companies have interest in ESG, but they have some concerns about the ambiguous definition and guidelines regarding this issue. ESG represents very dramatic and great the trends, but we could also fall into the fallacy of making some errors if we just follow the speed. So through this forum, we have to clearly define the concept and definition of ESG. So those who have participated here, so we will also pay attention to your insightful ideas. So to make the Korean style ESG to take root in Korea, then we will make our utmost efforts. So the policy committee has also hosted some hearings and the meetings to gather some insightful ideas from different sectors of the country. It will be very useful opportunities. So I'd like to make a commitment from the perspective of the National Assembly for this issue. I'd like to extend my deep appreciation to Mr. Choi Jin-young, CEO of the KoreaHerald and his staff, and as well as Kim Yong-Jin, CEO of the National Pension Service, and Mr. Yong-Jin, Mr. Sonny Lee, and Mr. David Smith for their speeches. And also, my special thanks goes to all of the distinguished guests who are joining us today. I'd like to wish you the good luck. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your congratulatory remarks. Next, we have a person who is at the core of the Korean economy and finance, Deputy Prime Minister and Prime Minister of Finance, Mr. Hong Nam-gi. Hello, this is Hong Nam-gi, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance and Economy. Congratulations on the opening of the KoreaHerald Finance Forum 2021. I would like to express my gratitude to Mr. Choi Jin-young, the CEO, and the organizers for their hard work. I would also like to welcome Seoul Mayor Mr. Oh Se-eun, Mr. Kim Yong-Jin, CEO of NPS, Mr. Yoo Young-jae, CEO of Sust Invest, and Mr. Lee Sung-yong, CDO of Shinhan Financial Group, and all the distinguished guests who are here today and gracing today's event. Distinguished guests from home and abroad. As the global economy is coping with the COVID-19 crisis, the new economic paradigm is emerging that will open the post-COVID-19 era. In particular, the COVID-19 crisis served as a momentum to realize the gray rhino, which is climate change and lack of jobs and social safety nets for the vulnerable, can be direct obstacles to economic growth. Against this backdrop, governments and markets around the world are making full-fledged efforts to convert to a sustainable and resilient growth path with ESG as a core value. The EU announced the Fit for 55 package bill aimed at reducing carbon emissions by 55%, and the European Green Deal to invigorate green industries such as green mobility and renewable energy. The United States has declared carbon neutrality by 2050, thereby providing approximately $2 trillion to support green infrastructure projects. Meanwhile, the financial market, ESG-conscious investments are on the rise, accounting for 35% of total global AUM last year. Some investment banks predict that this proportion will go up to 95% by 2030. And this is the speed that is taking place. Such policy stances and changes in the global financial market are posing a threat to Korean companies, but at the same time providing windows of opportunities too. To this end, the Korean government have been taking preemptive and proactive measures such as Korean New Deal 2.0 and low carbon neutrality promotion strategy, which was followed by the announcement in August 21 of plans to expand ESG infrastructure for great transformation. The government will continue to promote ESG policies from the perspective of support rather than regulation in order to further solidify the foundation for sustainable growth centered on ESG. Today, I would like to take this opportunity to highlight 3 policy directions. First is market-oriented. We will actively encourage the creation of market-oriented ESG ecosystem. By the end of this year, a government-wide KESG guideline will be announced that is in line with the global ESG evaluation indicators to promote corporations' autonomous disclosure. ESG evaluation agency guidance and stewardship code accounts will be devised to help establish the autonomous market regulatory system. In addition, to help market participants, we will establish an ESG management support platform that provides information on domestic and foreign market trends, related policies and consultancy services, and an ESG investment platform that provides corporate disclosure and financial product information. Second, create new market. We will actively support the creation of new markets by active ESG investments. To fully promote the implementation of carbon neutrality 2050 from next year, a total of 12 trillion won from next year's budget will be invested for carbon neutrality, including the establishment of low carbon economic structure and ecosystem. A climate response fund of 2.5 trillion won will be newly raised to actively support the transition to low carbon industry and the green growth finance industry. In addition, we will prepare Korean green classification system and social bond guidelines to introduce sustainability-linked bonds directly linked to corporate ESG performance, thereby laying the institutional foundation to revitalize private ESG investments. From next year, we will actively support external review costs for green bonds and consider ESG factors when evaluating fund management and selecting investment pool managers for pension funds. We will actively and continuously expand ESG investment of the pension fund. Finally, support market. We will actively help companies transition to ESG. We will provide a framework for self-ESG level diagnosis for small and medium-sized companies to adapt to the stringent global ESG regulations. And we will provide and expand customized ESG education and management consulting, such as the carbon neutral management innovation vouchers and workplace innovation consulting. Moreover, to strengthen collaboration between large and small companies, we plan to provide tax credits for ESG management support costs for partnering SMEs. In classic Chinese Book of Changes says that a noble man changes like a tiger, a gentleman changes like a leopard, but a small man only changes his face. We're standing at a point where great transformation is needed in line with the trend of the times of ESG. Rather than reluctantly adopting to ESG superficially, I hope that we will be able to lead the big wave of ESG by taking on a fundamental change initiative. I hope today's forum will yield a lot of constructive and productive insights and support for post-COVID ESG. Thank you very much.
네, 다음으로 사이먼 스미스 영국 대사님의 직사가 있겠습니다. 2018년 3월 주한 영국 대사로 부임한 이후 활발한 외교 활동을 하고 계시는 스미스 대사님은 서울로 오시기 전 우크라이나와 오스트리아 대사로 계시는 등 35년의 외교 실무 경험을 가지고 계십니다. 모두 큰 박수로 맞이해 주시기 바랍니다.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'm Simon Smith, British Ambassador to the Republic of Korea. My sincere thanks to Chief Executive Choi Jin-young of the KoreaHerald for inviting me to add my congratulations to today's Finance Forum. I'm sure the reason that I've been invited is that we are just over 1 month away from the start of COP26. And at the beginning of November, in opening COP26, the UK will welcome around 130 leaders, including President Moon Jae-in, to Glasgow in the UK to agree measures to limit the rise in global temperatures to 1.5 degrees Celsius in line with the objectives set out in the Paris Agreement of 2015. Now, scientists have told us that in order to achieve this target, we have to cut global emissions by half by 2030. And they've told us that if we fail to act, we will fail to address an existential threat to both businesses and, more broadly than that, to whole countries. The early warning signs are all around us: rising sea levels, extreme weather, flooding, vast wildfires, and so on. The early warning signs are there, but it is encouraging to see an increasing number of Korean institutions like Shinhan, like KB Financial Group, represented here today, who have responded to this urgent challenge by aligning their investment portfolios with the recommendations of the scientists. At the government level, we're now eagerly awaiting the announcement by Korea of a new nationally determined contribution, a 2030 emissions reduction target at COP26, which also meets the recommendations of scientists to halve emissions by 2030. Looking across the world and looking, for example, at President Xi Jinping's speech at the UN General Assembly last week, he gave a commitment that China's public institutions would end the financing of overseas coal projects, and that confirms that Korea is now taking the right path. Why do I say that? Because in the last 3 years, I've had many conversations with Korean industrialists and financiers who told me that if the Korean government ended the financing of overseas coal projects, which it did in April 2021, the Chinese would simply step in. And now we know that this is not the case. And it confirms a more profound point, that the issue of financing polluting technology is no longer about purely environmental impact. It's about economic competitiveness, with more and more countries now fully understanding the costs of coal and what happens when demand dries up. So in the last few days, we've seen Sri Lanka acting, following in the footsteps of Pakistan and other countries, by committing to stop building coal power plants and to derive 70% of their power from renewables by 2030. So we can, around the world, we can now see a genuine race to zero underway, and that will be central to the story of prosperity and influence in the coming decades. Now, many institutions in Korea have firmly committed themselves to this race to zero. So I'm glad to offer sincere congratulations on the very real progress that Korea has made in the last 12 months. But to those congratulations, I add my encouragement to decision makers in Korea to go further, to invest in your visionaries and innovators, be one of the winners of the race to zero. And this is a race in which there can be many gold medal winners, not just one. And it's a race which will be the preeminent and perhaps the only possible economic growth story of the 21st century. So my message to the financial industry today is threefold. Firstly, back the technologies of the 21st century, not those of the 20th century. Second, use science-based methodologies and align your investment portfolios with the objectives of the Paris Agreement. Join the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero before COP26. A number of Korean institutions have already done this. I encourage those who have not done so to sign up. And finally, look to the recommendations of bodies such as the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, the TCFD. Don't see them as burdensome administrative process, but rather as tools to build confidence among your investor base, as ways to show them unequivocally that you are proactive in managing the immense risk that businesses face in the transition to a low-carbon economy, and that you are fully committed to winning this race to zero. Thank you.
Thank you again, Ambassador. We certainly look forward to the COP26 coming up soon. 네, 마지막으로 오세훈 서울시장님의 축사.
So I'd like to invite, so we will listen to the video, so message from the 오세훈 Seoul Mayor. I'm pleased to meet you all, as I am also Mayor of Seoul. I'd like to sincerely congratulate the KoreaHerald on the hosting of the second Finance Forum. My special thanks goes to Choi Jin-young, CEO of the KoreaHerald, and his staff for having organized this valuable opportunity to discuss the future of the finance industry as well as new opportunities in the post-COVID-19 era. We are in the middle of a great paradigm shift. The entire human being has ridden in the wave of rapid economic and social changes triggered by the pandemic outbreak. The two of the keywords that have driven those changes and are to be discussed in this forum are ESG and digital. Environment, social, and governance-focused business management, and the digital-enabled revolutionary changes across industries and our daily lives have already changed the landscape of the finance in the future. To say that the order of the future will be rearranged by nations or cities that lead these changes is not an exaggeration at all. Under the premise that increasing the competitiveness of a city requires enhancing the competitiveness of finance, the Seoul city has started running to achieve its goal of becoming one of the global top 5 financial hubs. So in response to the reorganization of the Asian financial hub triggered by the exodus of financial businesses from Hong Kong and the new technology-driven changes in the finance industry, we plan to turn Yaoi Island into a special financial district and then make Seoul truly a hub of digital finance in Asia. To achieve these goals, we will increase the total number of foreign financial businesses located in Seoul to 250 and also set up Seoul Investment Agency to extend our every support to enable overseas financial organizations and corporations to have their presence in Seoul. So with the Seoul Vision 2030, the master plan to capture these strategies, Seoul City has already started to systematically implement them. Furthermore, to make Seoul an exemplary model of ESG-based financial hub, so we will So encourage the private sector's voluntary commitment to ESG and also actively support businesses' efforts to practice ESG. We will do our utmost efforts to enable Seoul to become an attractive destination for doing business and bring in financial investment in ESG into Seoul. So we will also pay keen attention to the valuable insights to be discussed in today's forum and make a full use of them to complete the future of Seoul as an Asian financial hub. Thank you.
Now, let us begin the forum with a keynote speech. Mr. Kim Yong-Jin, the CEO of National Pension Service, has been working in the public sector for the past 35 years. It can be said that he is a living witness of the Korean economy and finance sector. The title of his speech is National Pension Service's New Path ESG. Please join me in welcoming him with a big round of applause. Good morning. I am Kim Yong-Jin, CEO of the National Pension Service. The theme of my keynote speech is Korea's ESG revolution, green shoots after the pandemic, to explain about the responsible investment policy of the National Pension Service. And I would like to thank the CEO of the KoreaHerald, Mr. Choi Jin-young, and the organizers of this forum for giving me this opportunity. And we had with us, he just left, Honorable Yoon Jae-ok, and Deputy Prime Minister, and Seoul Mayor, and His Excellencies ambassadors of the British Embassy as well as Argentine Embassy, who delivered their congratulatory remarks, and I would like to thank them for their presence. And here we have leaders in the financial sectors, especially the ESG leaders. And they are very trusted partners of National Pension Service, and I'm very glad to see you all today. This forum today is a valuable place where in-depth discussions on ESG investment and digital transformation will take place that will lead to a new financial order after the COVID-19 pandemic. I hope that everyone participating in today's forum will be able to gain insights in the face of the new financial market paradigm. The COVID-19 pandemic has changed many parts of our society and is acting as an impetus to quickly spread the need for responsible investment activities. Moreover, global giants are taking a closer look at whether social responsibilities that must be fulfilled are ignored and whether sustainable growth is the goal when evaluating a company's financial performances. The world's largest asset manager, BlackRock, in its annual CEO letter last year, said it would put ESG factors at the center of portfolio construction and risk management. And NPS is also doing the same. We are looking into the companies and also the BlackRock company warned that it would exercise its voting rights against the management and board of directors for companies that do not make sufficient efforts in this regard. And this year, UK non-profit organization Share Action, Europe's largest asset manager Amundi, and the world's largest publicly traded hedge fund Man Group, and other 32 social groups and institutional investors composed a consultative body urging 24 global financial companies that supply the most fund to the development of coal industry to increase the supply of greener funds. The business environment brought about by the pandemic is putting company sustainability to the test. Global companies have no choice but to pay attention to ESG as to survive and overcome this uncertain future. In particular, the importance of non-financial factors represented by ESG is palpable. change is taking place and in progress. Amidst such a transition period, I will explain today about the direction of responsible investment of the National Pension Service. ESG has already begun to have significant impact on the economy, our culture, and society. And the NPS, as a long-term investor, reflects ESG factors to ensure stable long-term growth of profit when managing and operating the fund. The NPS took the first step in responsible investment in 2006, and this is an essential point. Back then, we managed a responsible investment fund as a method of stock consignment. In 2009, we joined UNPRI, and in 2015, we devised and prepared ESG evaluation standards, thereby pursuing responsible investment diligently. In July 2018, we were the first in the domestic market to enact stewardship code and apply an integrated strategy that reflects ESG factors in investment decisions. Among the decision, direct management assets of domestic stocks, active types were applied first, and in September of the following year, we prepared a plan to promote responsible investment. The NPS plan to promote responsible investment has 4 pillars. First is about the target asset class. The NPS has set as basic direction forward to apply responsible investment to the entire asset class of the fund in the long term. We also plan to apply the ESG integrated strategy, which integrates ESG factors into the financial analysis process, to domestic and foreign stocks and bonds. And we will be in talks with related foreign companies to this end. NPS plans to expand the obligation of responsible investment report submission to all commissioned management companies. To further promote responsible investment, we also give additional points and conduct monitoring in appointing and managing asset managers. Efforts are also exerted to lay the foundation to revitalize responsible investments. We plan to include non-financial factors when trading institutions such as securities companies and asset management companies prepare corporate analysis or management reports. Ever since NPS joined PRI in 2009, we joined ICGN and ACGA in 2019, and last year we joined AIGCC in efforts to actively participate in the international efforts. By joining international and responsible investment consultative bodies, we will better understand best practices and increase exchanges with global institutional investors. NPS manages our people's retirement funds and is a large, long-term investor with big investment portfolio. NPS is responsible for the retirement of all Korean people and is in line with the national economic development. Therefore, we can proudly say that we share the common destiny with the Republic of Korea. As of end of June this year, NPS's investment in domestic stocks amounted to 184.3 trillion Korean won. This is about 6.7% of the total stock market capitalization. We also invest in around 750 KOSPI companies and 380 KOSDAQ companies representing the Republic of Korea. Based on such great sense of responsibility, NPS inspects financial and non-financial factors periodically to identify opportunities and risk factors that may affect the mid to long-term value of target companies we invest in. NPS has our own ESG evaluation system by which we evaluate twice a year to calculate an ESG rating. ESG scores and ratings for each company are calculated by applying different industry-specific weights to items in consideration of the different characteristics. The evaluation results are systematically applied to the investment of NPS. From this year, in terms of active direct management of domestic stocks, if the ESG rating is D, excessive assignment compared to the benchmark is prohibited as a rule. From next year onwards, this will also be applied to passive direct management of domestic stocks. In addition, if the ESG rating is lower in the case of new incorporation into the active and passive direct management of domestic stocks, an ESG report should be attached for a review as mandatory. NPS is also strengthening its fiduciary responsibility to ESG. NPS's responsible investment is executed in accordance with the guidelines on responsible activities of the National Pension Fiduciary. Through fiduciary responsibility activities based on this guideline, we try to minimize investment risks and improve the long-term profitability. NPS incorporates environmental and social issues as well as governance structure in key management issues of domestic stocks when we talk with the domestic companies. For foreign stocks, we plan to set up a dialogue strategy with foreign companies considering different management features. Substantializing of responsible investment of assets under consignment management is also important. We plan to devise a plan that takes ESG factors into account when selecting and evaluating domestic and foreign stocks and bond management companies. So far, measures have been centered around ESG factors, mainly in domestic stocks, but within this year, we plan to expand this application to overseas bonds. Honorable participants, responsible investment activities of NPS do not increase the uncertainty of companies, but rather preemptively propose NPS's basic direction and transparently interact with these companies, thereby leading ESG investment to successfully take root in our society. NPS will increase the predictability of companies for responsible investment so that companies can proactively prepare and take initiatives on their own. As mentioned, the NPS will do its utmost as the first runner in ESG in the domestic market, and we are the first investor in the Korean market who took the initiative of ESG. And that means that we have a lot of accumulated experiences and know-hows and information, more than any pension funds in Korea. And NPS, we are a responsible investor of the Korean people's pensions. And with this spirit, and taking into account and utilizing our information and expertise accumulated, we will do our utmost to bring forward and to make ESG another leap in the Korean society. And I believe that NPS has the responsibility to do so and share the information with the public. NPS will be with the Korean people in the leap forward in the ESG era. I hope this forum will serve as a platform for the sustainability of Korea and of mankind. Thank you very much.
So thank you so very much. So he has presented the direction of the National Pension Fund, pension service for the future. So let me begin the first session. The COVID-19 pandemic has completely changed the world. All markets are evolving faster than ever, and so digitalization has become a must, not an option, in any sector. So given this situation, I believe that we need an accurate diagnosis and consideration of the current status of digitalization. Suni Yi, the Chief Digital Officer of Shinhan Financial Group, will give a presentation under the theme of why so many digital transformation fail. Please welcome him with a big round of applause. So I'd like to extend my appreciation to Mr. Choi Jin-young and his staff for inviting me as a speaker. So KoreaHerald is the English language media outlet, and then so we have also audience from other countries. So I will make my presentation in English.
So I want to take a break from the rest of the sessions on ESG and focus this session on the digital issue. It's sort of a practitioner's point of view. We all want to desire outcome of a successful stories, but the reality of digital transformation is in fact very, very difficult. And I want to take you to the other side of the DT that we often neglect and ignore. And by doing so, we can perhaps appreciate the magnitude of DT challenges, and we all can reposition or prepare better for the future. Hi, my name is Sunny. I run the Shinhan Digital Solutions Company as a CEO, and at the same time, run the group's digital transformation as a Chief Digital Officer. Before Shinhan, I spent about 30 years in strategy consulting, mainly the last 20 years with Bain & Company, heading their financial service practice in Asia. So, DT is now almost on a household phrase, right? Everyone has heard of it, living in it, and pretend that we all are expert at it. Digital transformation consists of two words, digital and transformation. What a lot of people do not realize is that the word transformation is an integral part of this phrase, and the real challenge is in the terms of transformation. So digital, which is a representation, talks about technology, methods, and appearances, but the real challenge is in this term transformation, where we consider genetic changes, nature, permanent, and cultural aspect. The previous picture is interesting. I just want to show you this thing, is that to me, DT is confronting the corner in the speed racing. In a straight line speed racing, if you're an 8-cylinder car and the competitor's 4-cylinder car, the 8-cylinder car will win almost 100% of the time if you push the accelerator to the floor. It happens if you race car or a motorcycle, the moment of truth comes in the corner. If you speed up too much, the car will flip. If you slow down too much, the competitor will gain speed on you. So going through the DT transformation is almost like facing this speedway in cornering. See, the ultimate question for DT is how do you know when you're done with it? Or how do you know if you are going in the right direction? Or how do you know when you have reached the destination, right? Well, we all can claim self-victory, but the reality is that unless you have done these 4 things and see a noticeable difference, noticeable, tangible difference, you have not really explored the DT to its full potential. DT has many different elements, and there are 3 other dimensions outside of digital technology. I won't go into deep aspects of DT technology itself, but obviously the first requirement is you have to introduce some form of a digital technology into your organization, whether it is AI, big data, cloud, or blockchain, whatnot. The technology make or buy decision is relatively a simple decision. The rest is more challenging. The second criteria deals with the improved processes. A good example of this is a Kakao Bank, where you do not need to visit branches physically to do banking service anymore. The third criteria deals with business model changes. A good example of this is a 배달민족, right, 배민, or 번개장터, or 당근 market, where you have introduced a new form of a community-based business or accentuated certain value chain. And lastly is the cultural revolution, not evolution. The good example is a 재택근무, right? And you know, there's a video conference being around us for a long time, long before Corona. But then why we ask ourselves, why we didn't have 재택근무 before? It's not about technology, it's the cultural issue where if you work at home, people feel that your boss feels you're vacationing, right? You're not working. And that is a big cultural thing. And now with Corona, you have no choice to do that. So it's more about cultural change that's really driving digital transformation. So what happens if you do all these things in the DT world? The empirical data was gathered by Accenture, where it shows that the difference between the leaders and the followers are about 2x in the beginning, but later it spreads to 5x. I think they use the revenue index here, but if you look at the profit index, the difference is more pronounced. But the graph tells 3 more insights. The first insight is that there is no hockey stick curve. In other words, if you miss the first few years, it is near impossible to catch up. The gap continues to widen, which implies that the learning curve effect does take place in digital transformation methodology. The second insight is that revenue is driven by the network effect, much more than the average economic model. So the reason these leaders can fetch 5 times more revenue is not because they have improved efficiency 5 times more or improved the productivity 5 times more or sales force has grown 5 times more, but some form of a network effect is in place, which means that customers are selling your products to other customers on your behalf, right? The third insight is that once you achieve a certain threshold, it is near impossible for the new entrant to enter this space. For example, I'm not sure who in their right mind would enter search engine space as long as Google owns 93% of the global market. I mean, we're stupid, right? How do you compete against Google? Same thing goes to Amazon. How do you compete against Amazon? It's just too late. Same thing goes to SNS market in Korea. How do you compete against Kakao? How do you compete against a neighbor? They're at this 10x stage now. So once you miss the window of opportunity, it is nearly impossible to catch up. So winner takes it all, phenomenal, sustain, but getting there is not as easy as the people thought. But the fact of the matter is, according to McKinsey study, about 70% of all DT fail. The Boston Consulting Group also claims about 65%. And my old firm, Bain & Company, also reports around 75% based on 1,200 companies they surveyed. So if you are in the audience and the midst of the DT, based on the statistics, only 1 out of 4 companies are successful. This is pretty surprising, right? And a somber fact. And yet, we don't hear a lot about failure cases in Korea. Why is that? So why don't we hear about failure cases? Obviously, there are a lot of reasons, but the next cartoon explains this somewhat. The first caption says, are we all aligned to do DT? And everyone says yes. Who would disagree with that, right? I mean, this is a kind of mother of all things. You know, everybody agrees to this program. The next question is, so what exactly do we mean by DT? And people start leaving the meeting as they don't exactly have the answer. So this is a very good question. What is a DT? And if you ask 100 people, you'll get 100 different answers. So I want to showcase 2 basic approaches most firms have taken in DT approach and how this has turned out. The first typical approach is what we call building DT from within. The GE is a good example. Aside from other managerial problems they had over the years, GE formed what they call the GE Digital. This is a company within company. The idea is simple. Since GE has a lots of data, they've got medical data, they got B2B data, they got B2C data, why don't we create a business that can use all this data and develop a business model? Great idea, right? This made a perfect sense. The problem is that after a while, since this is a business unit, they have to report their revenues and earnings to the board of directors. No different from other business units that have exact same KPIs, which drove their short-term objectives over the long-term innovation goals. The end result is a classic, what have you done for me lately? You get that questions all the time if you're the CEO of this business unit, where GE Digital fails to make any financial impression to the GE group and fail. So a lot of firms start AI company. We want to create an AI company, but it's a sinking money game, right? It's you continually invest, and sooner or later they'll ask, where's the revenue, right? And then they start focusing on the short-term gains and do this. As a result, pouring billions of dollars without any clear, tangible results, CEO was let go shortly after. The other extreme is to build a digital ecosystem outside of their mother company. The logic behind this is very simple and makes sense. If you want to create a unique culture different from the legacy culture, you have to build it outside. So Ford did that. They created a service company, Ford Smart Mobility, which was located outside of the Ford ecosystem. The problem is that it was so far detached and separated from the rest of the Ford organizations, no one really knew them and frankly didn't care what they were planning to do anyway. This was a critical digital mistake, as without highly integrated business processes, digital will not work. Digital itself is not a self-driving function, right? It's like you have to have a business process to work digital. Shortly after, without any major sponsorship by the Ford business units, these also too have failed. So both cases, the failure reasons are not necessarily driven by the technology. And according to Dana, author of Why DT Fails, points exactly to the same fact, that it is more to do with the change management issues and organizations' resistance to change. So what are the reasons for failures? So if you want to set the direction right, and if you are in the midst of a dwindling or fading change initiative, and you want to build a renewed momentum, or you want to reboot the entire program to capture the benefit of DT, I would suggest that you particularly focus on 7 key areas. To really ignite DT, there is a clear strategic dimension which often has not think through and often becomes a major obstacle later on. This is something you cannot accomplish by working harder, faster, or more cost-effective ways. This is much more structural issues that need to be resolved at a strategic higher level. The second, the right side, area is organization and cultural issues. For DT, this is a much more critical and sensitive matter and could become a highly emotional issue. And it really takes the 2 dimensions to work together to really ignite, to fire up the digital transformation. Any major shortages of lack of content in these 7 categories will lead to DT failures. The first one, as the previous cartoon says, the first critical element is to define the success of the DT. What is the definition of success in DT? Often this requires many rounds of discussions by many executives and different stakeholders. Most often, we tend to forget digital optimization is different from digital transformation. Digital optimization has more to do with productivity and efficiency, which all can relate to. Working faster, better, cheaper. Business transformation, or DT, requires a much more coordinated effort and thinking through process. Let me give you a few examples. Selling TVs in the United States, right? If you want to sell TV, right, the first thing is, well, how do I gain more customers? How do I enter new market? Well, there is no new market. Everybody owns TV, right? It's something they had since 1950s. You can replace a TV, but it's TV. So how do I sell more TVs to existing customers? And this is a problem Samsung and LG had, right? So they thought about this. Wow, I noticed the US Americans have bigger houses, so you probably need a TV in the living room. You probably need a TV, small TV in the kitchen. You probably need a TV upstairs bedroom. Now, in a smart apartment like in Korea, you probably just need one. But in the United States, you could do that. Then they realized by doing parametric estimation, based on where they live, you could actually calculate the full potential of a TV's consumption rate. When they try to do that, then they realize, they don't have this information. Who has this information? Yeah, Amazon has this information. Best Buy has this information. They realize the customers, not their customers, is those platform customers. So they asked this information. What Amazon said, they said, no, they're not going to give that information for free. So they had to create this database to come up with the more TVs, so the customer database. Now, that's digital optimization. Then they realize the next question is, how do you know they are watching our TV? That's a good question. How do you know they are watching our TV? Now, this is different from telephone, mobile phone. Soon as they buy mobile phone, they're using it because they're charging it, the billing goes out. But once they buy TV, you don't know they're watching TV. In fact, no one watches TVs these days, right? No one is rushing back to drama hours at 8 o'clock to watch TV anymore. So how do you know they're watching TV? Then they realize, maybe, perhaps, you should go into service business, work with Netflix, Amazon Prime, and so on. We said, okay, we work with you, and maybe perhaps we do a 5-year program. So anybody buys our TV, we give the TV for free. You can have our free as long as you watch these programs for 5 years. In fact, TVs becomes a major advertising campaign. Then it becomes a subscription business. You pay perhaps maybe $30 a month to Samsung. You get free TV every year. You replace TV. This is different business. That's digital transformation. Now, that's hard because you're changing from manufacturing company to service company. Another good example is what I call the audiobook. In the United States, with the visual impairment or visual handicapped people or any traveling salesman, they spend long hours in driving. They cannot read a book, so they like to hear audiobooks. And one of the best audiobooks in the world, anybody guess what that is? It's Bible. Yeah, a lot of people like to listen to Bible. Now, in the old days, Bible reading is some actors, actresses would read the Bible from front to cover, in fact, front to end. And that's how they get paid, right? In today's world, a pastor or some famous actor could read only about 2 pages. And the AI takes over, it disciples that, they could mimic the entire Bible voice with the same voice. Now, that's digital optimization. First of all, you don't have to pay that actor for the entire Bible length. You can only pay for 2-page length, right? That's the optimization. Now, they realize, I want to read Moses' part. Who would be the best person to read Moses? And people say, Charlton Heston, because this guy is in the movie, right? Everybody thinks about that movie. So, well, unfortunately, Charlton Heston is dead. He's dead. And some people say, John Wayne. Well, he's dead too. Then realize, let's get their voices from old movies. They'll mimic that, and suddenly, Charlton Heston reads the Bible. And they say, what about my grandmother? What about my grandmother reading birthday poems to my grandchildren who've never seen? So they get their voices, right? My mother's voice, who's been dead for 10 years, they can recreate the entire new business. That's a famous business coming up. That's digital transformation. Another good way is selling used cars. Now, you used to go to a lot, right? You used to go to a lot and look at the car and sell, Yong-Jin or whatever, right? That's the old model. The new model is online, right? The U.S. is big on that. You go online, you look at the car online. You could price it online. You do the insurance online. Everything's online, just like Ponggaejang to anything. That's a big wave. It hasn't come to Korea yet, but it will come to Korea. So that's digital optimization because selling offline to online, which is makes sense. Then we realized, well, if I buy a used car, I'm stuck with it 2 or 3 years, right? And things change, and I want to drive different cars. And somebody say, guess what? How much you pay for a used car? I'll pay about $1 million per month. Okay, you pay me 1.2 million per month. I can give you used car every month. So every month you can choose car. In fact, I'll deliver my car to you, your house, every month. These are the cars you can choose from, the 20 cars. If you pay 1.5 million, these are the cars, BMW, Lexus, Mercedes-Benz. If you pay 2 million, you choose them. So this become, you can pick and choose your cars every month. This has become subscription business. That is a digital transformation. So if you look at digital transformation, it's much more than just working faster, better, and cost-effective ways. So that's what we mean by digital transformation. That is what it takes to be successful in the phase one. Once you determine your end goal, critical issue arises when the investment involves. Most digital conversion takes place in the digitization, the first one phase. Digitization is a digital representation of analog presentation. This is where you would put your analog driver license, scan it, and put it in your phone. There is no unique digital properties other than its presentation format. This certainly reduces the storage space, human errors, but this is the simplest form of digital transformation. The positive aspect of this phase is the ROI of digital investment is rather simple to calculate, relatively short-term focused. The second phase is what we call digitalization, where robots and other AI-based computerization process in a fraction of time. It certainly helps and a major departure from analog processes, but often this is much more difficult to calculate as the technology continues to evolve. You need to continually upgrade with technology. Most big changes you have seen is the fast food restaurants like McDonald's. No one's taking orders from me anymore, right? And the big restaurants, the robots start delivering your food. So this is interesting. Do you know where most waitresses spend their time? You do time and motion study. 82% of their time and motion studies says basically they travel from table to kitchen and come back. That's where they spend most of the time. So this robot's taking 80% of their timing savings by delivering from the kitchen to the table. That's all they do. And that saves 82% of time. So that's the digitalization. The third category is explosive technology, where this could be a game-changing technology. A good example is AI contact center, where it can potentially replace call centers today. Today, it is about 20% capable of replicating entire human operation response behavior. But eventually, we would like to see up to about 80%, going from less than 500 scenarios to over 250,000 scenario-based Q&As. And you would ask yourself, 250,000 questions possible? Yeah. I'm just amazed kind of questions the customers ask operator. You know, what's the weather like? You know, from on and on and on. He had a fight with his wife, or what should I do? And there's just millions of questions like that. The required investment, however, is unknown at this point and hard to justify with the current short-term ROI calculation. Because of this dilemma, most often than not, the companies make classic mistake, tend to over-optimize the first digitization process and are afraid to jump through the next two phases. They just dwindle on the first phase. The next critical failure resides with the people. Unlike other technologies, I'm sorry, I'm trying to keep in time. A major DT requirement is that the users need to be digital savvy. And as you know, if you're over 50, it is not natural to be digitally competent. More often than not, this requires a behavior change or influenced by outside coach and new talent. How many of you heard metaverse? Many have heard of it, but how many used it? The number drops down to 32%. Because a lot of people heard of it, but you have to use it, right? So it's a coupon effect. on senior people. Now, a lot of senior people knew about coupon, knew about online, but never used it unless this corona took place and they start using it, and it's not hard to use. So this is all about the experience curve that requires digital transformation to be successful. Having these coaches make huge difference. Having these people to take senior people to actually run through how to order from coupon takes experience. Without the infusion of these people, you will have a blind leading blinds. I'll experience the gain of 48% improvement if you work with digitally talented people. This is more acute in the senior ranks, especially at a senior level. The other area that needs much more attention is the public and academic sectors in Korea. Commercial sector, because of the incentive system, is highly motivated to move forward with the digital transformation, but often this leads to overspec issues. So this is like a chain theory. The strength of chain is determined by the weakest link, right? Weakest link. So what is the weakest link? It's not necessarily the commercial sector, but it's the government sector right now. The example here is a bit confusing for an average audience, so let me just switch to a different example. Let's pick an automotive transaction. Let's assume that you have a digitally automated selling in process between the buyer and seller. But this will alone cannot complete the process. You still need to ensure that the actual transaction has occurred that authenticate with 인감도장, right? 인감도장, which is by and large is an analog process that has been around with us for over 1,000 years. And on top of it, you have to compare it with 인감증명, right? With the human eyes, which also is a fraud process to begin with. So you have to do this both for seller and both buyer. When selling real estate, the process is more cumbersome. The income process is an archaic analog process, which is in digital age has no room. And yet, this is something commercial sector cannot change on its own. The authentication technology has advanced a lot. For example, today, blockchain is used to authenticate the original product from the fake ones. This is now beginning to be used on user luxury items. I don't know if you used the fake items before, but it's almost impossible to differentiate from fake ones, the original ones, with the visual inspection. But with the blockchain, you could literally authenticate Hermes bag, or Rolex watches, and so on. Another good example I'll give you is the gold trading. Now, in your closet, you probably have some gold bar or small ounce of gold that you gotten for your children's 100th day or first year birthday. And if you look at closely, it says 99.9% gold, right? Stamps on it. But how do you know it's 99.9%? Have you ever thought about that? It says 99%, I know that, but how do you know it's true? Unless you can melt that gold, measure it again, average person will not do. And it's purely speculative data. And yet, we have no way to verify and trust this number, but with the blockchain technology, we should be able to trace who sold it and bought it, right? So you can find the fake Rolex watches or verify gold purity. I'm sure we can use digital signature to confirm the identity rather than analog stamp. There are hundreds and thousands of examples like this, where the public sector is just too slow to catch up in the digital transformation. This requires a massive DT campaign to upgrade the public sector. Education faces similar challenges. By most ministry education operating model, it is a location-based license and organization model. So entire control mechanism is geographic-based model. So Daechidong is highly sought after because of the location, This is no different from location-based licenses the Financial Supervisory Board used to give out. The Gyeonggi Province Savings Bank license would cost more than Honam license because there's simply more people in Gyeonggi-do, right? Well, today, this is meaningless because everybody's online. Right? Everybody's online, right? So the Honam Bank could actually operate in Seoul because it's online. Well, you use the similar logic. Because the corona affected all students online, and because this is location-based, it's no longer the key algorithm, you may want to rethink about how one should run the education model for Korea as well. The most critical element of DT is how organization is structured to perform DT, and agile is the key. The reason agile has to be critical is that the DT is often moving target, and one cannot wait to plan and implement sequentially. You have to do it in a parallel manner. So in a traditional manner, if you want to shoot something, you have to aim, shoot, and readjust. In the new world, you have to shoot, readjust, and shoot again. The aim part is deleted. This highly implementation-focused approach, the organization has to be flexible and mostly need to be collapsed to very flat organization. Because of R&R is flat, roles and responsibilities is flat, what happens is that role of the middle manager in a traditional sense is largely gone in DT. This is where resistance come from. In Agile, everyone works and implements. It's rare that you have middle managers checking the works of their subordinates. This is a major source conflict in a pyramid-based organization. And inflexible labor countries, which I would pick Korea as an example, this is one of the reasons why Agile is not successful in Korea. I will skip this page due to time constraint. But this basically is a serial cycle. To accept a new change, you have to go to a shock, anger, rejection, acceptance, and healing phase. What happens in DT implementation, the cycle's so fast, emotions don't catch up with you. So people say, oh, we implemented digital. No, the emotion's still at the shock stage. They're still just shocked. So the good example, we're doing an AI contact center. This is where we're introducing a lot of AI-based model. Now, if you're a call center employee, you're teaching AI, right, all these scenarios, in the back of your mind is like, hey, wait a minute, why am I doing this? This AI is taking my job away, right? It's not an emotion that you want to deal with, right? Why would I want to teach robots to take my job away, right? Even the company promised that person will have a different jobs and so on. It is a very difficult emotional challenges. The last deals with the emotional fatigue. DT is a journey, and unless you have milestones and resting stops, people get immune and start to have a business as usual mannerism. The issue with DT is that it's been with us for some time, and it continues to change in a new form under the same banner. It's sort of like a corona, where we have over 3,000 get infected, but the public is getting tired of hearing this anymore, right? So the key here is that we have to somehow put the old wine in a new bottle, where we have to continue to market and fresh ideas and packaging to keep their interest in line, or else we lose their cooperation and interest. For example, if you look at the typical finance company, CEO and ask them what are their four core focus, 85% say digital and ESG. And it's very difficult to differentiate on this manner. So how do we differentiate this? And it's differentiated by demonstrating tangible results. So that's probably the 7 most common mistake we make. And I think I'll summarize DT in this cartoon. In the end, if someone asks me to define DT, I will say in this manner. So you're having a kind of video conference saying, wow, it's a digital transformation. Let's talk, and say, well, I can see your slides, because there's some slides. Like, well, can you download the plugin? And the other guy says, oh, we are Internet Explorer 7. You don't allow a plugin. So, okay, can I email you? Then he said, well, you got the firewall. We cannot accept your firewall. The next thing is, well, why don't you use Dropbox or the transfers? Like, well, it's all firewall. We can do it. The email, because the limit size is 1 megabyte. Then you say, how about Google Document? Well, if you're firewall, Google Document won't work. And the last thing I say, can you fax to us? Right? Back to analog. And this happens to me many times when I try to get some data to the government. They will ask me to fax stuff, right? So digital journey is about end-to-end. It's a chain model. The strength of chain is determined by the weakest link. With that, I want just maybe a couple minutes on what we're doing in Shinhan Financial Group. You know, we have engaged digital transformation for 3 years now, and you know, I'm from outside. I've been consulting for a long time. You know, Chairman Cho, and I believe his leadership, and he basically said our biggest enemy is not Kakao or Naver or Toast. It's us. It's Shinhan, and we're trying to constantly change our culture. So how can Shinhan change legacy business? How can Shinhan change our culture? Our formula, the growth is a function of direction, which is strategy, multiplied by speed, which we call a SAQ, S-A-Q, which is speed, agility, and quickness, and to the nth power, which is culture. Don't ask me empirically whether this is right or wrong, because even I have 2 PhDs, I cannot empirically prove this is right. But directionally, I think this is a good approach, where it's a reboot. We have to create and delete old culture. So with that, our strategy, this is the last page, is twofold. Today, if you look at our Seoul fund, which is a car, Alpha is the security, the Seoul is the bank, and a Plus is a group. We have a #1 market share in this space with the #1 activity, monthly activity users. So we are #1. It's still a long way to go, but we are very comfortable in this space. So we call the kind of B platform. The typical issue the financial companies are facing is what we call transaction and traffic history. Now, what this is that we have a transaction, but we don't have a traffic. What this is that we have a shoppers, but we don't have a window shoppers. The window shoppers, we need to create traffic. Now, how do we create traffic? It's no matter how sexy you want to make the financial app, it's just not interesting enough for the average customer, right? This is what we call the destination application. You go to Seoul to make transaction. You don't go to Seoul to window shop, right? It's different from Kakao, different from Naver. So how do we do that? So you go to Go platform. You have to engage with other lifestyle platforms. Now, this is interesting. In the old days, Amazon will take over the world. So you join this mega platform, which you don't have any leverage. You're kind of one of those, basically, a big cop, right? So in the old days, Coupang will take over the world, or Amazon will take over the world. Well, that's not the case. The classic example is Nike. Nike pulled out of Amazon last year. The reason is like, I don't have access to my customer data. Amazon has all the data. So what they're creating is what we call the D2C platforms. It's a direct-to-consumer platform. That's what we're interested in, lifestyle platform. That's what we call Go platform. That's our story, that we want to be #1 in B platform, and we want to attach ourselves to Go platforms and create a lifestyle platform so where we can create traffic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much on sharing why DT fails and its case studies and what we need for DT to succeed. Thank you very much, Mr. Lee, once again. Next, we will go on to the second session. ESG has become an integral part of all corporations. The financial investment industry is making a shift centered on ESG. The second session speaker is Mr. Ryu Yong-Jin, who is the founder and CEO of Korea's leading ESG investment consultancy, Sust Invest. Mr. Ryu will talk about Korea's financial market and ESG, its challenges and prospects. Please give him a big hand. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for the introduction. I would also like to thank the KoreaHerald and Mr. Choi Jin-young, the CEO of KoreaHerald, and all the organizers for inviting me to this event. And it is a great opportunity for me to be here to share my thoughts with all of you. Since we have time constraints, I would not be able to go into great detail, but through the slides that I have prepared, I would like to share with you on my thoughts. Today, I will talk about the Korean financial market and ESG, its challenges and prospect. And the content looks like this. I will first touch upon the prologue and then the advent of fiduciary capitalism, And then I will go on to ESG as mainstream of investment, and then status update of ESG in Korea, and policy challenges as well as prospects given that ESG is realized in earnest. First, prologue. Sustainable development, this is also what UN has devised. The UN SDG, to make it short, is ESG. It's stimulating sustainable development via capital market. We believe that there will be three approaches. One will be through the market, another will be through policy, and the third through system. But Korea, compared to other companies around the world, we have a different development path of ESG, which I mean by the ESG that is in discussion in Korea is mostly by the regulators. And this is a little bit of a disappointment to me, because when we look at the advanced countries in their efforts in ESG framework, the discussion itself comes from the people themselves rather than the regulatory institutions. ESG has a large spectrum, and it has a variety of things and factors. It differs by the companies, it differs by the issues the companies face, by business models, whether it is a local company or if this is a global company. The issues all differ. So this diversity of issues are there, and it is difficult for the regulator to pinpoint one or two issues in terms of making this great transformation into ESG, and it will rather restrain the innovation or innovative thinking in terms of the ESG approach. Therefore, it's not the regulators, but it should be the participants, aka the pension funds, who have the expertise and have the capabilities and capacities to run and operate this investment in ESG, to take the initiative in this ESG discourse. And by doing so, the identification of ESG that is important to a certain company will be reflected to the investment returns, and also this will be reflected to the assessment, thereby minimizing the risks and maximizing opportunities. And ultimately, it will give impetus in increasing the profitability and the value of the company. So, in a nutshell, I am saying that the ESG is something the investors should take the initiative with. This was the PRI in-person conference in Singapore that took place in Singapore. The person who is presenting here is Goldman Sachs' Mr. David Blash from Goldman Sachs. He was an advisory to Mr. Al Gore, the former vice president of the U.S. He joined hands with Mr. Gore, and in 2017, he founded an investment asset management company in London. And this company looks into the ways to change the conventional ways of investment, the asset managers' investment practices, and they understood that unless the classical practices don't change, the fundamental change will not come about. And what he was saying was that when he was at Goldman Sachs, it was only the next quarter that he could look at and that he was looking into rather than a long-term view. So it is to increase the personnel management or the labor force, managing the stakeholders, and it was difficult for the conventional investors to look into long-term goals and long-term investment indicators when they look only at the next quarter. So it's not the next quarter, but it is now time for us to turn to next generation, so that when we're making investment decisions, we have to consider the impact that it will have on our children and our grandchildren. And to do that, he founded the Generation Investment in London with Mr. Al Gore. And it was very impressive for me. This was a bestseller in Amazon named Other People's Money, and it was written by Sir John Kay, one of Britain's leading economists. Since I was so impressed by this book, I translated this book into Korean, and I did not translate the title verbatim, but I said in Korean the other motives of finance. What I mean by this is that finance have other motives. In other words, finance should be a bridge between between people who have money and who don't have, and they have to operate a payment system for this. However, in the intermediary, there comes a derivative and other products that these people, institutional investors, are trading among themselves rather than allocating the capital needed to the needy. And this led to the global financial crisis, and this is what John Kay is maintaining in this book. And to tackle this practice, the universal investment, fiduciary capitalism are proposed. Before I translated this book, I had the intention to write a book in this regard, but then I came across this book and it was so impressive that I decided to translate. And this is another book that I would like to introduce. It's called Reimagining Capitalism. And this was translated into Korean as The Great Transformation of Capitalism. This was written by the Harvard Business School Professor Rebecca Henderson. And this book says that capitalism is on the verge of destroying the planet and have failed to reimagine capitalism. And through different devices, the capitalism should be reset. And this is also the theme of one of the forums in the sub-forums in the World Economic Forum. Fiduciary capitalism, the advent of fiduciary capitalism, and after 2008 GFC, the national wealth funds and pension funds had seen great losses, and they looked back on how they were operating their pension and their philosophy. And that gave birth to the fiduciary capitalism. And these long-term large institutional investors, which we also call them universal owners, will have to pursue sustainable growth of the national economy by impacting the market industries and corporations through innovative operation of fund. And this is not just a short-term run, but rather a marathon, and that we have to support the investors. And in that sense, long-termism comes up, and to consider ESG and introduce stewardship. And this is fiduciary capitalism. And last March, the CalSTRS and the world's largest pension, 2 times bigger than Korea's NPS, worth 1.7 trillion US dollars, which is GPIF and ABP, and these pensions came together to announce this declaration of our partnership for sustainable capital markets. What they're saying is that we have to look at many generations and many decades to come, and we are not only taking into consideration the shareholders, but also the stakeholders when we are making investments. And we support the corporations that pursue long-term vision and strive to act as stewards of long-term capital. And such global pensions have changed their course completely towards ESG, and ESG is applied to all asset classes. In Korea, Larry Fink of BlackRock, who Mr. Kim Yong-Jin has referred to earlier, is the CEO of BlackRock, and BlackRock runs 9 trillion US dollars. This is a massive, astounding amount of money, and the CEO of this company is putting a lot of emphasis on ESG. And why is this? Much of this asset of BlackRock are invested by asset owners, and they look back upon what they have been doing. And since Larry Fink is a salesperson, he is, in my opinion, it's one of his positioning strategy to emphasize on ESG in terms of attracting more investments. And Mr. Kim Yong-Jin of NPS, I respect him greatly on his stance towards his support to ESG. But nevertheless, I believe that NPS will have to do more in terms of turning its course into ESG and make a transformation into an ESG investor, just like BlackRock. And pension funds, in short, are different from the asset managers in Yeouido office district. The Yeouido asset managers, they can never be at the size of the National Pension Fund, but NPS is investing more than 180 trillion won in domestic markets. So NPS will not be said that they are successful just by making much money in terms of good investment, that they were lucky in investing a good company that is profitable. But rather, we have to see the NPS's investment and its profit that directly correlates to the people's pensions. And so the point I'm making here is that the asset managers that we see in Yeouido is a totally different concept to NPS. But what is ironic is that the investors, the investment managers at MPS are mostly from this Yeouido asset management companies. And this means that they should not follow the practices that they have been doing at the small private asset management companies, but rather they would have to, so to say, change their clothes into an adult clothes to manage the National Pension Services Fund. So universal investors' new approach to investment. Actions should vary based on the context. The Buffett Index, when we look at Buffett Index, the Kospi is only at 100% of Buffett Index, and the US's Buffett Index is 200%. Taiwan and Japan they have much bigger Buffett Index than us, and PR ratio is 10.2 to 3 times, whereas Taiwan is 15-fold. And Japan was similar to ours. However, they advanced forward with the Abenomics, and the ESG incorporated to go to 15-fold. Then why are we so undervaluated compared to Taiwan? And we have to look into this, and the universal investors should find the causes for our undervaluation and to tackle these issues. And they have to make the optimum investment decisions. But what we're doing at the moment is that saying that all the other things are similar to Taiwan, we are lagging behind because of the intransparent governance and the, so to say, Korea discount issue. And that is why pension funds like NPS, the universal investors, should take the stance of ESG framework. And we also have to have not only the financial technicians, but also the ESG experts in the company. And the composition of the labor force should change as such. Why universal investors should consider externalization? Well, coal mines or coal energy plants are called stranded assets, which means that their value goes down by time as time goes by. So the return of investment will be lower and lower as time goes by. So we have to externalize these assets. The external costs of listed company, this was the source is True Cost PLC and UniPRI. The 3,000 companies around the world, their profit was $6 trillion, and out of the 6 trillion revenue, 2.2 was external costs, and most of them, the categories of their external costs were greenhouse gas and other greenhouse gases and other pollutants. And calculating these categories into dollars, it comes up to 2.2, almost 2.2 trillion US dollars of external costs. After the revolutionization, this external costs were inevitable, but after the Kyoto Protocol, these costs are becoming internalized to the companies. In Korea, the carbon emission came down to 650,000 tons from last year's 750 million tons. And this could be that we can invest in other means by devising a new mechanism to lower the carbon emission. And this would be the investment that they make internally to reduce the greenhouse gas emission. And this is also calculated into the internal costs. The people who look at only the next quarter when investing would not be able to see this, but when we are talking about long-term investment, we have to take all these factors into consideration. This is an analysis of E, meaning environment and carbon management. This will have a positive impact on fine dust and carbon neutral. And the S factor will be about capacities, gender equality, employment-friendly management, and so on. And by doing so, the national economy will be enhanced and will develop, and this will bring back the long-term investment return to the universal owner. And I believe the transformation of NPS should take place in this regard. GPIF have already declared in 2015 that they are universal owners. So CSR and sustainable management, and suddenly this term ESG came up, and Harvard's Professor Porter also says ESV. And what is ESG and what is the distinction point? Well, I believe that the root is the same. It has the same root, but it has different branches. A corporation's social responsibility is an activity to elevate their brand awareness and their brand value. But ESG, by the market mechanism, the companies who do not do ESG framework will be burdening more costs. I have a company that I'm looking into, a chemical company, a chemical material company, and this company is delivering to companies in Norway and Denmark. And last year, this company got a letter saying that we will give you 2 years for your ESG levels to reach a certain level for us to continue to work with you. And this was the letter that they got from these European companies. And until now, the ESG was not actually a bar in terms of advancing into other markets, especially European markets, but now it is the reality. And these are the ESG factors, and recently, I understand that there is an ESG certificate that was launched by the CFA Institute, and these are the important points that CFA Institute looks into in terms of ESG. The PRI is the signatories, number of signatories that signed up in PRI. I know that this figures should be updated at the moment. They have more than 3,700 signatories. Most of the companies that we know of are the signatories of PRI, and the aggregate assets under management is over 100 trillion US dollars. Now, why has ESG come to the fore as such? And some people say that it's due to BBC, and this is the initials, the capital letters of BBC of BlackRock, Biden, and COVID-19, not the media outlet in Britain. B for Biden, one of his presidential pledges was very much focused on environment, and the case in point was to rejoin Paris Climate Agreement, and that he will expand the ESG disclosure mandatory for the listed companies. And he has appointed Mr. Brian Dees, who was the ESG head of BlackRock, as the director of National Economic Council. The NEC is a huge office that has a great impact on the financial market, and I believe this was a signal to the global economy. And the C stands for COVID-19. That's a vague sense of crisis of the environment, and the environment crisis that we were facing became palpable. And due to the climate and environmental crisis and hazard, this zoonosis diseases as well as the climate changes occur more and more frequently. And in 2018, WHO had warned already on disease X. And this is again due to the climate change, and this gave more importance to the significance of our responsible investment. And various stakeholders take more notice of corporations and industries who are focusing on ESG. The companies have different stakeholders in the past and present, but the stakeholders are different from the past because today's stakeholders are doing more in-depth monitoring, and they have their voice and they voice out. And there are two reasons why. It's one, because of the SNS, the active participation in SNS, and this spreads out. And I believe this is very similar to the religious revolution of the medieval times. And also, the second factor as to why our stakeholders are different from the past is because of the MZ generation. In my company, myself and my vice president, except for two of us, all other employees in my company are MZ generations. MZ generations are very much focused on fairness. Last year we had an employee in his or her fourth year sending an email to the CEO and the vice president about the fairness of their dividend or profit sharing in terms of their salary. So their standpoint and their perspective are totally different from the older generation, and they take the stance of the fairness in terms of everything they do, especially their profit. Since I don't have my clock, do I have 10 minutes? Okay. Let's turn to the domestic market. We are seeing aging population, and that is why the money is flowing into the pension fund. This is the same for Japan and also for Korea too. In the 1970s, actually 1976, Peter Drucker wrote this book, The Unseen Revolution, and he maintains that the pension fund socialism will come about, and the fund managers will become more conservative due to their fiduciary duties. So the population is aging, and the fund managers are also turning more conservative. So what Mr. Drucker proposes is that the mandatory allocation of 10% of the total asset to venture capitals. And as such, I believe that the NPS not running a risk return profile, a classic investment method, we have to break away from this practice. And maybe we can do so by mandatory allocating a certain amount of the fund to a more adventurous capital. The public fund asset of 67 public assets that the Ministry of Finance is controlling, the total asset as of 2020 is 2,270 trillion Korean won. And out of this, we have more of a purposed fund for sewage water management and so on. But other than that, we have this big chunk of fund that could be operated and since we are talking about the great transformation to renewable energy and ESG energy and people-oriented economy, we can use this discretionary fund to make it easier for this transition and transformation to happen. I would like to make 6 policy proposals. One is that the declaration of universal investment of public funds. So it should be stipulated in the law, the National Finance Act, to establish universal investment principle. And the NPS investment policy statement also established newly a universal investment. And the NPS already has their 6 principles in investment, and last year there was one item that was added, however, not the universal investment feature, so it should be newly established. And second, introduce the listed companies' ESG disclosure obligation. An early introduction is needed. At the moment, from 2023, we have already in Korea that for the companies whose assets are more than 2 trillion Korean won will disclose by 2023. However, this is too late because the world is running much faster than us. In Europe, it was already mandatory in 2018 and in Japan 2021. And the U.S. passed the ESG Disclosure Simplification Act in 2021. And also, we should also have tax exemption benefit for long-term ESG fund holder. There are a lot of investors, like individual investors, since 2021 in Korea that they are investing in their stocks, but they are not taking a long-term investment stance. I've been investing for the last 35 years, and I can say from my experience that a short-term gain will not do, and a investment in stocks is the only way to success is a long-term investment view. And maybe this is because of the wrong education that is being provided to the public, and maybe that was because of the fees that would come out from these transactions. However, this is not the case. We have to take a long-term view in terms of stock investment. In Korea, we are seeing a big increase in the number of ESG funds. In the second quarter, 70 million Korean won worth of ESG funds were newly established. However, the issue is that these ESG funds are just ESG in the name, but not a fundamental ESG funds. So what we need to do is that we have to introduce the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation of Korea and to make it an obligation for the companies to disclose their ESG related statements. And fourth will be the revision of Corporate Governance Related Act for a fair capital market. And fifth is to mandatory assign to ESG investment asset class when allocating assets, following Peter Drucker's proposal. And for these asset classes, we have to have a long-term performance evaluation, maybe up to 5 years rather than an annual evaluation. And the sixth proposal will be to foster an ESG investment ecosystem. And what is most important in this ecosystem is the evaluation of ESG mandates. And the rating agencies of ESG, their independence is of utmost importance. The rating agencies, if they have a relations or are influenced by the companies, the investing companies, they will not be able to make a fair decision. So when this is all done in an appropriate manner, what will happen? The ESG will trickle down to not only fund managers, but also the individual corporations. And this will lead to resolving the Korea discount, seeing the Kospi going onwards and upwards. And also, one of the dire issues that we are facing is the depletion of NPS. And this was a graph that I made several years back. And when the future investment earnings rates are raised by 0.5%, the depletion will be delayed by 5 years. When it's raised by 1%, it will be delayed by 10 years. And when it's raised by 1.5%, it will be delayed for 19 years. This is an excerpt from GPIF. And public pension funds expand their investment in ESG, and this will increase the incentives of the companies to do ESG, and this will improve the national economy and the soundness of pension finance. And when the equity market is revived, the pension finance, the pension funds soundness can also be enhanced. And this is the virtuous cycle that GPIF have proposed. And I believe the ESG wind that is blowing is almost a level of a typhoon. I don't believe this is a healthy phenomenon. I hope that this wind will calm down so that it could be a steady wind that will change the future of the Korean economy. Thank you.
So we have heard from the CEO Yong-Jin about why the pension fund has to make an ESG investment, and he also presented the proposals for the National Pension Service for the future. Now I'd like to invite the third speaker. So there is a proverb that applies to both investing and the life. Crisis itself is an opportunity. And I think it also applies to ESG, so which we talked about throughout this morning. So next speaker is David Smith, a Senior Investment Director of Asian Equities in Aberdeen. He will make a presentation on the sustainable alpha through ESG investing, identifying risks and opportunities. Let's watch this video.
Hello everybody. As you've heard, my name is David Smith. I'm a Senior Investment Director here at Aberdeen, based in Singapore. It's a pleasure to be with you today, albeit virtually, and I hope one day we can be together in person. Today I'm going to speak a little bit about ESG, what it means to us as a firm, the benefits we see from integrating ESG into our investment process, how that's backed up by some of the academic research that we see out there that suggests there are benefits to integrating ESG, how we go about integrating ESG into the investment process, and then I'll focus a little bit on the work that we're doing around energy transition, the opportunities that we're seeing and how our work has led us to look at renewables companies, storage companies, transmission companies, and some of the interesting opportunities that we're seeing within Asia today. So if we go to the next slide, please. I'll start here by discussing what ESG means to us. ESG is an issue that we incorporate as part of the investment process, not from a belief in morals or values, but because we believe that ESG factors are financially material and that they impact corporate performance. So they're not extra financial, they're not non-financial, certainly. These are issues which can drive, we believe, corporate financial performance, so profit and loss, as well as stock returns. And so we think, if you think that ESG is financially material, it makes sense to incorporate ESG as part of the investment process alongside other traditional financial metrics. And in doing so, we believe we can make better decisions for our clients by fully understanding a broader range of information that's available to us. We also think that after we've invested, continuing those discussions on ESG to protect and enhance the value of our investments is helpful to us and ultimately to our clients. So the conversation doesn't stop after we've invested, it continues post-investment. You'll see on the right panel some of the issues that we look at as part of ESG. Obviously, these differ from industry to industry, but you can see E factors might include things like climate change and decarbonization, environmental impact of waste management. Social factors, we're hearing a lot about at the moment, might include behavior and attitude towards customers and employees, as well as communities and broader stakeholders, and issues around bribery and corruption. And the G factors, the governance factors, could include things around corporate structure, corporate ownership, who owns a company, how management are incentivized, what kind of pay they get, and how they treat and reward shareholders, hopefully equitably. So we consider all of these factors, E and S and G factors, albeit in different ways in different sectors, in different geographies, as part of our investment process to help us better understand companies, better understand industries, and make better decisions for our clients. If we move to the next slide, please. I'll talk now a little bit around what we believe ESG is before I go into a discussion around some of the benefits we think of ESG. So if we move to the next slide, please. So as I said, we consider that ESG is financially material. And one of the most important points that I want to highlight from this slide is that this is not just ethics. This is not values. This is not wanting to do good for the sake of doing good. This is around integrating E and S and G into the investment process to understand both the risks and the opportunities. So this is a way of, we think, minimizing the risks to our investment, but also looking at interesting alpha opportunities by looking at ESG as a lens through which we invest across different asset classes around the world. If we move to the next slide, please. So we think it's focusing on risk minimization, so risk management, how the company manages its own risks, assessing these financial and ESG risks together, and understanding that these risks evolve over time as the companies grow, as industries evolve, for example, but also beyond that, looking at ESG as a source of alpha. So understanding these big macro changes that we're seeing in industries, in consumer behavior, in technology, that allow us to identify long-term winners and losers. This is true of industries in transition and those affected by sustainability megatrends. And then on top of this, we can use engagement as a way of executing positive change over time to build resilience in our portfolios by strengthening the resilience of companies, and we think driving returns over the long term for our clients. Next slide, please. So I'll talk a little bit around the benefits of ESG. You often hear that ESG is a good thing to integrate. You've heard from me around the possible benefits of integrating ESG. There's a lot of evidence out there that would suggest that ESG has a positive impact on both corporate financial performance, so that's the profit and loss of a company, but also on the stock returns of that company as well as a number of other financial variables. If we move to the next slide, I'll start to talk about some of this research. So here's some research that came from MSCI as well as a broker that looks at the premium at which high quality ESG companies can and do trade to the market. So you'll see on the left panel, the premium of the higher quality companies has certainly bounced back over the last 5 or 6 years. So the higher quality companies trading at a premium to the market. This graph ends in April 2019. I think if anything, what we've seen over the last couple of years, and certainly since COVID, is that real bifurcation between ESG quality and ESG laggards. And so that premium of quality companies has really opened up. We can see on the right panel that higher quality ESG companies tend to have lower borrowing costs, and that's something that I'll come to a little bit later. And then in the bottom right panel, something that we've certainly seen over the last few years, that clients, our clients, global investors are also seeing this, and we're seeing a lot of capital being flowed into funds that look to invest in high quality ESG companies. So again, this graph, this bar chart ends at around April 2020. We know that those flows continue to accelerate around 2020 and have continued into 2021 as we see a lot of capital looking to invest in higher quality ESG companies, and increasingly companies that are looking to have a positive impact or a positive change on the environment and the community around them. If we look on the next slide, please. This is an interesting slide because this talks not really just about corporate financial performance or about stock returns, but zooms into the cost of capital of companies around the world and in emerging markets. So the theory has always been that higher quality companies should pay less for their debt and pay less for their equity. And obviously, if you have a lower cost of capital, that has interesting implications for your valuation. We can see here some work from MSCI where indeed, if you separate companies into quintiles, the highest quality companies have tended to pay lower cost of capital, both in terms of cost of equity and cost of debt. What's really interesting is that this bifurcation is really clear, particularly in emerging markets, where we tend to see greater information asymmetry around quality. And so the demonstrably higher quality companies, those with a higher ESG score, pay a much lower cost for their capital. And that has, as I said, really interesting implications for valuation and potentially returns. If we look at the next slide, please. This is some research that we saw again from MSCI around the potential, or around the returns from companies that are separated into this quintiles of high versus low quality ESG scores. What I like about this research is this is very long dated research. One of the criticisms of ESG research in the past around linking ESG with returns, and particularly stock returns, is that it's tended to be very short term in its outlook. So looking at 3-4 year time horizons. This is research that has a 10-year time horizon and looks at the comparable returns between these quintiles of ESG quality. And we can see here very clearly that ESG Q1 companies, so those in the highest quintile, have materially outperformed those that are lower quality. So what's interesting here is we're seeing quite a big differentiation in performance here, with apologies, the Q5 companies, so the highest quality companies, materially outperforming those of lower quality over a long-term time horizon. If we turn to the next slide, please. This is a more recent study done out of NYU Stern that looked at a wide variety of academic research. It's a meta-study that looked at over 1,000 pieces of academic research between 2015 and 2020 to draw broad-based conclusions around the way that researchers found links between ESG and either corporate financial performance or stock returns. And we're seeing some really interesting results here. So the research found a positive relationship between ESG and financial performance for 58% of corporate studies that's focused on operational metrics such as ROE or ROA or stock price. And 59% of investment studies also showed similar or better performance relative to conventional investment approaches. So we're seeing in a majority of researchers that there is a positive link between ESG and either corporate financial performance or on stock returns. And there are some broad takeaways on the right panel. We can see improved financial performance due to ESG becomes more noticeable over longer terms, and that should be intuitive because a number of the issues we're looking at within ESG are longer dated in nature. And so whilst in the short term you can get dislocations, those should start to get priced in the longer term. For investors, we can see that ESG integration, so really considering ESG as part of the investment process, performs better than just a simple screen. So just excluding certain industries is somewhat of a blunt tool. Integrating it more proactively provides for better performance. And then the third point that I would draw out is that ESG provides better downside protection. So that when there are these big dislocations in the market, these big corrections, as we saw in 2008, for example, as we saw last year as part of COVID, higher quality ESG portfolios tend to be more resilient during these big market dislocations. If we move to the next slide, then I'll start to talk about the way that we look at ESG integration. One of the things I wanted to focus on today was the importance of integrating ESG throughout the investment process, rather than something that happens just after you've bought a stock. So if we move forward, please, I'll talk about this in a bit more detail. So I've sketched out here the way that we think about ESG integration throughout the investment process. Many years ago, we came to the conclusion that to integrate ESG in the investment process, you need to reach back and go all the way along what I would call the life cycle of the investment. So you start with the work we do on sectors at Aberdeen. So we tend to draw out these multi-year, what I would call a roadmap of a sector. So 3, 4, 5 years. How do we think sectors will evolve from an ESG and a fundamental perspective? what will be the long-term drivers of return and risk in these sectors? What are the big mega changes and mega trends that we're seeing in this sector that we might want to be exposed to? But also, what are the key ESG issues in this sector that we need to be aware of as we invest around these regions? Obviously, those risks and opportunities differ not just from sector to sector, but also geography to geography. So what may be true of an Indian technology company may be quite different from a Chinese technology company, may be quite different from a Korean technology company. There may be similarities, there may be commonalities in terms of risk and opportunity, but we want to really break this down to look sector by sector and market by market. We can use those industry roadmaps that have integrated ESG as a way of generating ideas. So you see the kind of changes, the trends that we're seeing in a sector, then we should be thinking as a team, where do we want to have exposure? Where do we think we're going to make the most returns over the next 3 to 5 years, for example? Where are the most interesting investment opportunities? And where, as a team, can we focus our efforts in trying to really hunt down those investment opportunities on the part of our, on behalf of our clients? You move then to research, and that's when you meet a company, and that's when you draw on your store of knowledge around industries, of regions, of companies, to meet company management, to really do your due diligence on the way that management is thinking about strategy, thinking about execution, thinking about resources, the way they manage their supply chain, for example, the way they manage their employees. And obviously a big part of this due diligence, which can take a long time, is a focus on ESG. So as I mentioned earlier, the environmental factors, the social factors, the governance factors are all baked into our consideration of the overall quality or attraction of a company before we invest. Following on from that research and due diligence, assuming a company meets our quality hurdle, where we think that the company is a sufficient quality to be included in our portfolio, and where we think there may be interesting investment opportunities, then we come to the decision around including that company in portfolios that we manage for our clients. And again, ESG is part of that consideration. So as we consider to ourselves how much of a company we want to own in our portfolios, then that discussion is influenced by the overall attraction of returns over the next few years, the view of quality of a company, and also the view of ESG of a company. It may be that there are 1 or 2 issues that we need to speak to the company about in more detail before we increase our active weight in a company, or it may be that we think that the company is already very, very high quality from an ESG perspective, and so that would inform the weight that we have of a company in the portfolio. So as you see, we moved all the way from a sector work to the broad roadmap, to idea generation, to research, to meeting companies, to portfolio construction. ESG is part of all of those discussions. And then after you've invested in the company, those discussions continue. So we continue to meet with management, we continue to discuss ESG, we continue to evaluate the way that companies are managing their supply chains, the way that the company is attracting and retaining talent, for example, the way that management are being incentivized. And those ongoing engagements help us to build an understanding of the quality of a company and iterate our view of that quality. And those engagements should inform the way that we construct a portfolio. So as you get more comfort with a company, as you get a more holistic, deeper view of the ESG quality of that company, maybe you increase the weight of that company in your portfolio, all things remaining the same. But also those engagements we have with companies should, if you feed back, inform the work we do on sectors, inform the work we do on idea generation, inform the research we do. So there's a positive feedback loop as well. All of this is not easy. It's taken a lot of time to develop and iterate our process to ensure that ESG is integrated throughout that process. One of the things we've done very deliberately is ensure that we've got folks like me looking at ESG embedded within an equity team. So we're integrating the people as well as the process as part of the investment process. So we can have that broad-based view of ESG throughout the life cycle of the stock. If we move to the next page, I'll start to talk a little bit around the way that we've used this process to identify some opportunities within energy transition, particularly within renewables, but also within battery storage and associated grid and transmission infrastructure. So obviously there are a number of interesting opportunities around energy transition and sustainable energy around the world. What we've tried to do as a firm, as an equities team, is to go a lot deeper than just buying a few solar companies and saying we're invested in energy transition. We've tried to look at the broad range of infrastructure that's required and the preconditions that are required to allow for the successful penetration of sustainable energy as part of the energy mix. If we move to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit more about the opportunities that we see. So as I said, the thesis that we have as we look at the work that straddles a number of sectors, actually, both energy as well as utilities and capital goods, for example, is the need to transition to at least a 1.5 degree world that's driving policy from governments, but also responses from companies around the world as we continue to see investments in renewable energy technology. We see opportunities for solar and wind technology, including the component manufacturers. We see opportunities for transmission infrastructure, so building power grids to evacuate renewable energy from one part of a country to another, including smart grid and Internet of Things technologies that solve the issue of curtailment as well, but also opportunities around storage as well, and batteries, and the way that batteries can be used as part of a grid network to solve the issue of curtailment. And curtailment is the fact that the sun doesn't always shine and the wind doesn't always blow, and that's been one of the big challenges around the broad penetration of renewables as part of the energy mix. On the other hand, we've identified a number of risks, excuse me, and they could be power companies who are dependent on fossil fuels, either those that burn fossil fuels or those that dig up fossil fuels from the ground, companies that operate within this fossil fuel supply chain, and then companies involved in transmission and distribution industries that are not upgrading their grid. So what we try and do is use our long-range work on sectors to identify who we think are the winners in terms of the industries and the subsectors, and also who we think the possible losers are. And as a first step, that should inform the way that we look at our portfolios. If we look at the next slide, please. One of the things that we've noticed over the last few years is that whereas historically we've known that fossil fuels were part of the problem for climate change, renewable energy wasn't cost efficient. Over the last few years, we've reached an interesting point in terms of technological advancement, where we're seeing the cost of wind and the cost of solar, we can see here on the left and right panels, decline incredibly over the last decade, to a point now where we're now seeing cost comparison or cost parity between renewable energy and fossil fuels. So now renewables are, on a generalized basis, as cost efficient as fossil fuels in many parts of the world. If we move to the next slide, please. What we're also seeing is that the cost of storage is coming down. We've seen incredible investments in storage technology from companies in China and also in Korea that's reducing the cost of storage per kilowatt hour to a point where storage is now becoming interesting as part of a grid infrastructure. As I mentioned earlier, if you think about curtailment, the sun doesn't always shine, the wind doesn't always blow. What you want as a grid is a steady supply of energy. That's something that fossil fuels did give us and renewable energy doesn't always give us. If you are able to attach cost competitive storage to a grid and store energy that's generated during the day from the sun or from the wind to be released at a later part of the day in the peak evening demand period from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m., then you can move to a grid that is completely free of fossil fuels. For a long time, that was something that we thought was not going to be possible for a number of years. Now we're getting to the point where battery storage solutions are getting more cost efficient, and now we're reaching at a point where renewable energy plus storage is a really interesting solution for as part of the energy mix around the world. If you move to the next slide, I'll start to talk about some of the adjacent opportunities that we see as part of our broader work within sectors. We've looked at the opportunities of batteries. We've tried to sketch out where we think those opportunities are. You can see that Asia, where we're focused, is going to be a big driver of battery demand in terms of battery storage. You can see this is driven by China, but also you look at markets like India. This is not a pipe dream. This is not something that is a number of ways off, but relies on technological improvements. This is happening now. So we're starting to see batteries being installed across this region, and this includes the big batteries in Australia, but also increasingly in Chinese provinces, as well as Indian grid infrastructure and power installations, as we see greater penetration of renewables. Obviously, where you have this focus on renewable penetration and an attraction of storage, as an investors, we want to be exposed to battery makers. Pleasingly, there are a number of really interesting opportunities within this region, as I'll come to later. If we move to the next slide, I'll talk about some other opportunities that we're seeing. One of the themes that we've seen across this region and globally is the growing penetration of electric vehicles. So on a first blush basis, it may be interesting to invest in the folks that make the batteries for the vehicles or the vehicle manufacturers across the region. Work we've done is around the necessity of EV charging and what that means for power grids. So obviously, as you see greater penetration of electric vehicles, you need the associated charging network to be installed within a country. There's no point in having an electric vehicle if you can't charge it up. And so as investors, we want to understand, well, when does the tipping point come in terms of charging infrastructure to allow greater penetration of electric vehicles? But also as an investor, is electric vehicle charging network somewhere where we can earn an interest in return? And that's where we do a lot of work around looking at the ways that charging networks will evolve in different markets, given the urban densities of different markets and the different types of the different models of electric charging that we might see, whether it's on a private charging basis or on a shared public infrastructure charging basis. And if we move to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about what that means on a broader basis. So if you think about the broader penetration of renewables, the growth of storage, as well as the growth of electric vehicle charging, all of those rely on an upgraded and technologically improved national grid, a grid for electricity transmission. All of these are dependent on upgrading the grid transmission to allow for the fast movement of electricity from one side of a country to another. If you think about grids historically, you would have a fossil fuel plant which ran all the time, and then there would be a spider's web of pylons which radiated away from that grid and took energy to the surrounding towns. If you think about renewable energy, then you have wind farms or solar farms in parts of the country that are very resource rich in terms of either wind or solar generation, and that may be quite far away from urban developments. And so as a national grid, you need to be able to evacuate renewable energy over long distances across the country, greater distances than we historically have. On top of that, if you think about the intermittency issue, so the sun doesn't always shine, the wind doesn't always blow, you need a grid that is able to react quickly. So routing electricity from one part of the country to another, but also changing that to bring electricity from another part of the country to make up that load, or maybe routing from batteries to tap into the storage that we've got as part of a grid to use energy that was generated earlier in the day. And so you need a grid that is able to rapidly change the way that electricity is transmitted across the country, adapt in a way that is very quick to ensure this uninterrupted power supply. This is also true of electric vehicle charging networks. As you get greater penetration of EV charging across your country, that's done at times that don't necessarily gel with high levels of electricity generation. So if you think about when we charge our car, it may often be at night when we've gone to bed, or late in the evenings when we've come home from work. That may be a peak time for generating solar, for example. So what does this mean for grids? What does this mean for storage? So what we've tried to do as a team is take these ideas around renewables, take these ideas around storage, take these ideas around electric vehicle penetration, take these ideas around EV charging, and ask ourselves, rather than let's just buy a solar company and say that we're done, let's go quite deep into the technological prerequisites for these industries to achieve growth and see where it may be interesting along that value chain to invest on behalf of our clients. This has taken a long time to do this work, as you might imagine, but we think that's given us an interesting perspective in where we can invest on behalf of our clients along the value chain. And we think this has been one of the more tangible benefits of integrating ESG throughout the investment process, both in terms of the sector roadmaps that I mentioned that are heavy on technological roadmaps, but also the way that we're looking at opportunities on a mega trend or a mega theme basis, and also the risks that are inherent within industries. On the last couple of slides, I'll talk about some of the opportunities that we're seeing in this region. We can move to the next slide, please. One of the big trends that we've seen in Asia is these big commitments to net zero or carbon neutrality from this region. Asia is a region where we're seeing a lot of market-leading commitments, and certainly this is true of China. What I've demonstrated on the left panel in the darker bar chart is the energy mix in 2025 in China, and in the lighter gray bar chart, the energy mix in 2060. And you can see that big shift away from fossil fuels and towards renewable energy, with wind and solar big winners in terms of the increase of capacity there. One of the things that you get in China is this long-dated roadmaps for adoption of technology, for changes in the energy mix. If you look on the right panel, you see what companies are disclosing as part of a 5-year plan. So obviously in China, you get these 5-year plans from companies that gel with the 14th 5-year plan that we see at a national level. And so the large SOEs are driving the adoption and penetration of renewable energy. So you can see some quite ambitious targets for installation here over the next 5 years, but also what that translates to in terms of annual installation. That gives you good visibility into the way that the energy mix within China will change, and obviously, as I mentioned, what that means for the grid, but also what that might mean for component manufacturers as well. So folks who are making wind turbines or solar modules, for example, get quite good visibility over what may be coming over the next 5 years. If we move to the next slide, please. What this translates to is a very clear roadmap to annual installations, and I've drawn out on a line chart on the left what we might see for solar. And so you can see a nice steady up and to the right chart here for annual solar installations, and also on the right for wind. And you see a big peak here around 2020, because that's the rush installation period when grid parity subsidies were phased out. But again, you see a progressive movement to the right as you're able to translate these macro commitments to net zero to what we're seeing from power companies, utilities in China, and what that might mean for component manufacturers. Now, what's really interesting in this region is that the opportunities we've got to invest in energy transition, particularly around renewable energy and storage, are not just from the operator perspective, but also from the component manufacturer perspective and the supply chain. And if we move to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about what I mean. As I mentioned, China is leading this charge for net zero within Asia with these big commitments to net zero. Historically, the energy mix within China, certainly as it relates to coal, to oil and gas, had been imported from other parts of the world. What we're seeing now is that the opportunity within China is not just to invest in the folks who are going to be operating utilities or grids, but also that China leads the world in terms of renewable energy and storage. And so within this region, you have an opportunity not just to invest in energy transition within a certain country, but also to invest in global leaders who will benefit from this energy transition globally through the export of technologies. And so you can see China plays a very large role in wind turbines. You can see China plays a very large role in batteries in terms of market share by capacity, and obviously Korea has interesting investment opportunities from a battery perspective, and also in solar wafer space. So as the world decarbonizes, Chinese companies will benefit from policies that we see around the world, as well as the policies that we've seen within China. So I'll wrap it up there. What I've tried to do is give you a flavor of the way that we think ESG is beneficial in terms of integrating into the investment process, the way that we do it as a way of fully capturing the alpha opportunities as well as minimizing risks. And then what I've tried to do is bring it to life, giving you an example of the way that we're looking at energy transition and the way we've tried to go quite deep into the technological changes and requirements that we're seeing within the region to really allow for the penetration and growth of renewable technology, of storage, of electric vehicles. I'll leave it there, and I'll say thank you very much for your time today, and I look forward to meeting everyone in person down the road. Thank you very much.
네, 기업과 투자자들이 ESG에 주목하는 이유.
So Mr. Smith has explained why investors pay attention to ESG, and he also presented sustainable renewable energies and carbon neutrality related opportunities, investment opportunities.
Once again, thank you very much for being here throughout the forum from the very early hours. Thank you very much and hope to see you at next year's forum. Thank you very much.